Hello, I'm Ann Gritch, and with me is Monsignor John Sandersfeld, one of the founding fathers of the Diocese of San Jose. This is the Verbal History Project for the diocese, and Monsignor, we're delighted that you're here. Where to start? Where were you? What you were in the Santa Clara County, I think, when we first.
Yeah, I had just got here from the work at the NCCB as in the parish project.
Okay, let's talk a little about that before the announcement came about us.
Sure. I guess that's the two things. I came out of a 2.5-year stint with the bishops, and we studied the parishes of the United States and wrote a pastoral letter for the bishops in terms of the parish of the future. Mm-hmm. And we had just finished that when John Quinn called me, and he had said that that Most Holy Trinity had been vacant for 6 months by then, and that they had asked 24 priests to go there, and no one would go.
Why?
When the committee went out to look at the parish, there was a fight in the parking lot.
Oh.
They had to, a couple of cars were broken into. So they had this idea that this was a very difficult place. And in June, I had passed through on vacation, and I had suggested to John Quinn that Billy Justice, Randy Calvo and I would take the parish as a team, as we did with St. Peter's in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And he thought that would be too much because we were all young, and we would be the youngest pastors if we were named. So I went back to New York to finish the project, and he called November about 15th, and he said, I'm assigning you to Most Holy Trinity as pastor. And I said, I'm in the middle of this project, and we're about to launch the education part because the bishops had signed off on the letter. And I said, I can't leave Phil here alone. And
that's Phil Murnion.
Phil Murnion, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, but I'm your boss. And I said, he was the president of the NCCB. And I said, Bishop, I can't go to Most Holy Trinity. I don't speak Spanish. And he said, you will be there on December 1st. And I said,
that's pretty clear.
I have to ask Phil. He said, I'll tell Phil that you are now going to be the new pastor at Most Holy Trinity. So I came. And so then in March, we were declared a diocese. Right. So I was right there before the actual transition. I think that when you think of the history of our diocese, you have to think of the people that were in place down here. Mm-hmm. In 1961, 62, in those years, they built almost 25 parishes, brand new. Yep. They all came, a lot of those new pastors came from the same class, and a lot of them moved here because they wanted to come this way. They got a deed to the property, a debt. They got a bill for the loan, and go and do it. And the Vatican Council happened, and they had a natural connection with one another. And so they built a spirit, that group of new pastors, and they were talented guys coming out of high schools, and they've been waiting for a parish, and all of a sudden it broke loose so that a lot of them got a parish. So there was a lot of enthusiasm, and the transition in the 60s with the Vatican Council and everything, the Chancery was not very present to the Santa Clara Valley. So when I got back here because I had originally been assigned here at St. Lawrence, when I got back here, there was that enthusiasm still here, and there was also Terry Sullivan, who had been here a long time as a religious ed coordinator. Right. There was Catholic Charities, Catholic Social Service with Phil Conway and Helen Hansen and this. So there was infrastructure that had learned how to work together with Mentasti and Healy as the two Monsignor kings of the area. They bought land. They did a lot of things that a chancery might do. Because I remember Bob Moran saying, why do we need a bishop, or a diocese? Huh? I mean, what does that add to us? And there was that spirit that we really could handle it ourselves.
Monsignor Milani talked about that.
Yes. There were outspoken people. I mean, they weren't afraid they had risked a lot to start these parishes. They had a sense of where the church was going because of Vatican II, and they really had a mind to try to move it in that direction. So the way they built, the way they structured a parish, because these were large, it didn't have a lot of money, so you had to bring in lay people in responsible positions. You had to create large networks of people to really run them and everything. So they had really done, and there's a lot of CCD with Terry with the education of the teachers and everything. So there was
the
a
Master
lot
Catechist
of
program.
Master Catechist, all that was in place, and so there was a lot of enthusiasm. So when we began the diocese, there was a lot. Pierre inherited a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of already built networks of people.
Can I interrupt you for a moment? Do you remember that Mass when we officially became a diocese down at the Center for the Performing Arts?
Yeah, my sister read at that Mass. She read the reading.
Did she? Well, I will never forget when Bishop Pierre turned to Archbishop Quinn and said, Archbishop Quinn, welcome to the Diocese of San Jose. And the place went wild.
Yeah.
It was fabulous.
It was. There was already a spirit here. And like in education, because my sister was at St. Joseph's downtown, principal of the school, there was Pierre really could affirm people. However he did it well. And people felt able to, at priest council meetings or at meetings of the deans, because I was the dean by then, there was a lot of openness and frankness and an ability to express yourself.
Bishop Dumaine was very, very good that way. Of course, as a woman, he was wonderful with women.
And so there was a liveliness about it that I think the San Francisco guys never really understood. And my realization, having been up there in San Francisco for a long time, I could see the difference or feel the difference. And then having grown up here in Santa Clara Valley, the first deanery meeting we had after I came to St. Lawrence, was ordained, was at Midi High School, and McGuckin was confronted with, why aren't you building this high school on the east side, which was promised in
when the cathedral burned,
when the cathedral was
years
built.
ago. Yeah.
And the land was there with a big sign on it, Caddo High School. And so he tried to talk about why it was. And then Phil Conway, I think it was, jumped him about the aged and infirm priest money was being used as part of the general fund. He thought. I don't know what the truth of it was, but McGuckin was so angry. He picked up the chair and was slamming it down. And then the next item was, why are you all going? The pastors wanted him to declare that those that went to Midi or Alma for Mass on Sunday, they were not fulfilling their weekly obligation. This was the older priests, the Moss, Essick, and those guys. And they went on and on about the Jesuits stealing away from us, and Bellarmine was doing the same and everything. And I stood up as somebody saying, I was a little kid here. I lived through this, and so many times the secretary or the housekeeper would come and say, Father's sick, and we knew that Father had an alcoholic problem and there wasn't going to be Mass that Sunday. And so we got used to going to Alma or to one of these other places because they ministered. They were consistent. We'd have a chance to sit around and talk at Alma, which was a beautiful place. So I was saying, you really have to know our history. And since that time of knowing our history, I've been really conscious of that. And I think that's why I really like this project. I think that all of a sudden, whenever it happened, in the 90s, we made this flip, and the people did not know the history.
Yes.
They brought another history, not just a history, but a culture, but not knowing the history that was here.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden, I think we had gotten older, and there was a flip, and the goodness and the greatness of some of the people that served in this diocese really wasn't understood. I mean, this was the time of the farm labor. A lot of that was here, and the cannery workers and the union organizing, yes. And the guys that started these really creative parishes. All that sort of, that passed, and I mean, it was just a fact. Okay,
it happened.
We lost some of that same vitality of people being able to talk and plan together and work together, and the deanery being an actual functioning deanery. I remember with Terry as the dean on the east side, we began Renew. I had done some of the
yes.
first evaluation of the national program. I brought it back, and we started Renew. I mean, that first pier was just here, and that was one of the first years to Renew for the 5 parishes on the east side, and then we brought it to the whole diocese.
Yeah.
So it was the beginning of PACT.
Yes.
People acting in community together. It was the beginning of a lot of the solidifying of some of the early work of Moriarty and Casey and those guys with the Hispanic community, where we began to get it really empowered with Mateo and Murph Sullivan, Larry Largenti, myself, Terry Sullivan. I mean, on the east side, those. They came together, and we could call on the other guys that we knew well from the seminary. So a lot of things started to happen at that time that brought a lot of vitality, at least in my sense.
Now, you became vicar for Clergy 1988, was it?
Yeah, 86, I think, 87.
87, yeah, because I came to the diocese in 87, and I do remember one of the first things that we did. I think it was the Office for Word and Worship and the Committee on Ongoing Education for Clergy, and we did that preaching practicum at San Damiano.
Right, at San Damiano with Dick Hilliard.
Every priest was there.
That's right.
Every priest was there.
And the conversation when you talked about each other's homily, and there was a real openness and a learning experience with each other. And then we continued that with times of Jack Lawyer, the skill buildings, stuff. But it wasn't just skill building. We talked about the diocese. So the first one was on listening and conflict resolution and planning. And then the next one, we went on to kind of systems and how you build things. But those were lively discussions, huh?
They really were. And I do remember we had parish staff days. They were wonderful. I remember Rich Gula came and talked about end-of-life issues. Yeah. We did a wonderful thing with, was it Prop 187? And we had this huge gathering of all of the parish staff.
We started that when I was in San Francisco. I did personnel as well as being at Holy Redeemer and St. Kevin's at that time, before I was at most Mission Dolores. But I don't know whether I didn't have enough time or something. But the deanery up there came the idea of parish days, and we took over the seminary 2 different years in a row, and we had 1,800 people come.
Wow.
And we did parish workshops around parish, not around religious ed, but around parish. And so we took some of that same spirit when I came back and tried to do some of that work together, where parish staffs and would come together. And so we did many gatherings of parish staff so we could get some expertise or whatever that was, and then out of that, you and I came up, well, because Pierre said that his major goal in, I think it was, I was on the council then, so I wasn't vicar for clergy. I was on the council, and he came with 2 goals that year of lay ministry. They had made 2 or 3 attempts, and it never worked. Okay,
Right.
And the other one was, I forgot what the second one was, but in any case, I remember you and I got together and we started what ended up ILM,
Right.
where Pierre intervened and said, Kevin Joyce, I'm going to send him to school so that he can come back and take over. And so we brought the project to that time
That's
when
right.
Kevin could take over.
it to the next
but
step.
but it was, I mean, I just never thought a bishop could say, okay, this is what I want, and then it just never happened. So I just,
We made
with
it
you,
we
both
made
of
it
us
happen.
determined that we were going to make it happen, which we did, you know.
We did.
And it's been a blessing to the diocese.
It truly has. It was
just such a privilege to direct
Yeah.
that.
And you, the folk from Most Holy Trinity, I mean, you would send just
The best I could,
the
yeah.
best. And at St. Francis, the same thing.
Yeah.
Just wonderful people who are still doing great things
Yeah,
in the
they are.
diocese.
They are really doing.
It's just wonderful.
The sadness has always been that we have necessarily not made that next step when they've returned in all the places.
That's the
and so we
weakness.
have all these people out there. It was something that I realized at Most Holy Trinity was that we had Bible study, and we had a large Bible study in English and Spanish. And we put a lot of money behind it to make that work. And but the people they'd finish a 3-year program that was, and then they would say, well, we want more. And I'd say, no, you need to start. Okay. We never learned how to make that transition. And ILM, I thought, well, that will help us. But we never, in my experience, it was left up to the pastors to make that
Exactly.
transition. And I don't think we knew how to do that or how to organize it or whatever, give them enough authority or whatever had to happen, just never happened to the extent that I thought was the possibility of that.
I would
thing.
agree with you.
And I was always shocked when people said, "Oh well, yeah, I signed this so he or she could go to ILM," and I was thinking, "Oh no, what are you going to do with that person?"
That's right.
It's the same with deacons. Somehow we've got pastors convinced not to be threatened by them, but the problem is what we've then did is tie them to the pastor rather than to the bishop. And they're really the bishop's person.
Exactly.
And they need to be doing bishop's things,
But
diocesan things.
They do, but Father Joseph Benedict is really moving
moving
them
that direction,
He really
yeah.
is. They're doing much more of the service part, the waiting at table part.
That's right. They have Willie Agbagnani up at
Yes.
Regional, and some of the deacons have started to take on individual ministries and
Yes.
own them. I think they need to own ministries.
Particularly detention ministry.
Yeah.
And they love detention
right.
ministry. It's amazing to me.
Well, because it's theirs.
Yeah.
There's something about you're now the shepherd of this, these people,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Whatever it
And
is,
I just think that's why Jim Purcell's article in NCR is so important to me. Ever since I was a priest, Murph Sullivan used to kid us, but we were sent from the seminary, and we had a good catechetical program with Frank Norris. So we were sent, and I arrived at St. Lawrence, and there were 2,800 kids in CCD, and he's a big stack of benches out in the parking lot and garages all over the neighborhood. And he went on vacation, and he said to me, "Well, those are yours." And I thought, and I had to organize people to fix benches, but we had to organize 2,800 kids. And thank God we had engineers now starting at Lockheed and all those companies. And so they really helped and did a whole organizing thing with cards and colors and everything else. But there was no money. and there was just me, with
Uh-huh.
2,800 kids.
Kids.
Besides teaching 2 classes in St. Lawrence and being the associate. And but you depended on a lot of lay people,
Yes.
and you gave them a lot of authority. You had to survive. That's why I meant that this was a vibrant county, because you had to do that, because these parishes were so big.
Yeah.
St. Justin's with Dan Derry and Terry Sullivan, and was just as large.
And
they
John
were just,
Vianney. It's
yeah,
huge.
yeah, they were just huge places. And
Goretti.
Holy Trinity,
Oh,
Goretti,
great.
all those
Yeah.
places. And then the complication of bilingual and that
yes.
sort of stuff came in. But so there was a vitality because of the reality that we dealt with, which was overwhelming, and I think created a lot of imagination and a lot of openness to try things and try things new. So but we were first catechists. The newly ordained were catechists. Then, before that, they used to be youth ministers. Now they were catechist youth ministers. And then it became, we have to do liturgy because of the Vatican Council. So now you became the liturgy person, and you went out and you said, well, I have Mrs. So-and-so and Mr. They'll take over catechetics, and I'll move on to liturgy. And, and so priesthood for me, at least, and I think for a lot of people, started to morph from youth minister to catechist to liturgist. And then after liturgy came social justice.
Yep.
And it didn't after, but I mean, social justice emerged as a public figure. You should be a public figure. You need to be a prophet, and preaching became a big emphasis in one's ministry. So it kept changing on you, and somehow you had to cope with that change and morph and learn new skills and everything else. So for me, it was a fascinating priesthood that kept me alive, because you were constantly learning, exploring, finding what your gifts are and what other people's gifts are, and organizing it for them so they could take over and that sort of thing. So that's what I mean. That's what Pierre inherited, was this energy.
Yes.
Okay. And so you were open to do, and so like Jim was saying, when it came along, when I saw the example in the Philippines, and I had seen it in other places in Latin America where lay people were pastors, in Latin America, they call them catechists, but they're pastors, In the Philippines, the Mindanao bishops, you sent 4 people to a 6-month workshop, and they have to cross rivers and everything to get there out of the jungle. And then they came each weekend, or one weekend, I don't know how many times. And then when they had them trained, they would go back and in the meantime, the village would build a little chapel in bamboo or whatever. And then the bishop would come and consecrate that chapel. And when I was in the Philippines with the priest of San Francisco in '86, we toured all these. I was able to go with the film crew, and we toured in Mindanao, which was under guerrilla thing at the time. We toured a lot of these new chapels with the bishop as he consecrated them, and he explained the dynamic. And again, they had one that was the coordinator, but then there was one who was the head of liturgy, one who was the head of catechetics, and one who was the head of the community. Care for the community,
taking
the
care
sick,
of the sick,
all that sort of stuff.
Right.
And I thought, wow. And they were well trained, and they took over. And then once every month or two, a priest would come through and say Mass and baptize and whatever else. And the bishop saying, well, that people have to baptize if they have to baptize. And they were a little bit freer with some of that. I thought, wow, so when I came back to San Francisco, and I was staying at Pete Salmon's, and Pierre called and said, I have a role for you to be vicar for clergy. I said, well, no. I said, we've got to ask the priest if that's good, because I'm not sure that's a good thing. Pierre said, I was told not to point you, and but he said, I think it was Claude and Mary Peters said, you should ask him. So I said, no. We'll go down. I'll come to the priest council and we'll ask them, what is it that they want in a vicar for clergy? And then I can say, yeah, I could do that. And they could say, but we don't want you. We want somebody else. So he said, okay, I'll do that. So I came down to the priest council meeting and I walked in and Pierre, which was unknown for Pierre, kind of asked everybody, wait a minute, I want to introduce you to the new vicar for clergy. And he just introduced me as the vicar for clergy. I said, wait a minute, that wasn't our agreement, Pierre. And he says, I'm the bishop, and so you were the vicar for clergy. And I had just gotten back from the Philippines, and so that was still in my mind. And that's why I understood the importance of building community as well as building of preaching the gospel. The community also preached the gospel.
Yes.
And when we wrote the pastoral letter on parish, we wrote it from a perspective, and we had this debate on the bishops' committee, but I wrote it, and I said the ministry belongs to the community. It doesn't belong to the priest. The community needs to initiate people. The community needs to confirm. The community needs to build a sense of communion among each other. Mm-hmm. The community needs to be supportive to marriage and to witness to one, so that the mandate, the mission is passed on to all of us. Huh? Mm-hmm. The priest is there to help facilitate that to happen, or a person. Huh? Mm-hmm. And for me at that time of the parish letter of the bishops was the priest was his role.
That was that time.
Now he could do it in many different, as a shepherd, as a lawgiver. He could do it in a lot of different ways, depending on the structure he wanted. But that was his role, is to call forth the mission of the people of God and focus it and enliven it so that it can move forward. And that's the first workshops we did as the vicar for clergy, mm-hmm. were those of trying to say, there's intentional skills that you need to get this done. You can't just happen. Huh? We're not, and we still have that mentality sometimes. And I think that which is what kills us, and deadened us, was when we, in the 60s, and when those pastors came here, they had a sense of mission, mm-hmm. and a sense we're building the Church
yes.
of San Jose. Now we're maintaining it.
Yeah.
We're now this is just a feeling and an experience, and I'm not sure it's reality. It's my reality. Mm-hmm. We're building it so they'll come to us, and I'm saying no. No one is going to come to us.
Well, the new evangelization is we go out.
That's right, but that takes skill.
Yes.
It takes intentionality and deliberateness. Mm-hmm. And we don't have those early guys that built the parishes here in the Santa Clara Valley had a dynamic because they had to pay the bills. They had all these people coming, and how do we do it? So they got a push to reach out and pass off the mission and acknowledge that the mission was all of us. They had to. Right now, we tend to hold it to ourselves, yeah. Even the evangelization, like the priest is the center, and it's not. These are God. I said that on the 50th down at San Juan in the clergy week. The church is the people of God. It's God's church. It's not mine.
It's not ours.
And I hate when people say this is my parish, because it ain't. It's our parish mm-hmm. at best, huh? But it's God's parish or people. Huh? Mm-hmm. It's God's witness and it's God's mission. Huh?
Yes.
And that we discern together and experience and figure out how is it that we fulfill that mission or that destiny or whatever of all of God's people in that sense. That sense of a dynamic that pushes us out and enlivens us across. You think of the people like Moriarty or Jimmy Casey or Jack Isaacs or those guys that learned Spanish.
Tony McGuire, Jim McEntee. He's revered at City Hall with a big wall, or the county center, the big wall of pictures and everything, and we don't recognize him as God. He was one of us, and he was unbelievably creative in this diocese. So there were a lot of people that knew that the mission was the people of God and what they needed to do. Let me just ask you.
Pardon me, I'm talking.
No, it's fascinating. After your stint as vicar for clergy, I think you had a sabbatical.
That's right.
And then St.
Francis.
Talk about that, how that all got, because it
Pierre,
started out with you and Father Derry, right?
What came about was all through the time I was at Most Holy Trinity, it was too big, 7,800 families, and we had a conference nationally about the largest parishes in the United States came together. The pastors, Phil brought us together with some money and everything, and we talked about a model that Korea was doing, a priest in Korea or minister in Korea was doing, and how to divide it. And I had remembered that the guy that went to Panama City, what was his name? Leo Mann had given the first clergy study week when I was a priest in '67, and he came and said when he went to Panama as a missionary, he and 5 priests from Chicago, they stopped all liturgy and all sacraments for 2 years and did Bible study, which was the Family of God series that we took over early on when I was a priest. Larry Purcell and that class had taken it. So in any case, Leo gave this talk about a pastor needs to go in and divide the place like a bishop and act as a bishop. Okay, I always had that mentality, not to be a bishop, but that your job was to say you can't do all of this, and everybody's got a role, and so figure it out. So at Most Holy Trinity, we started neighborhood communities, Norwood, the Grange, down at Silver Oaks.
This was
Dove Hill School at Most Holy Trinity at St. Francis. Jack Lawyer came and said, "What are you going to do with 7,800 people?" Pierre and I had talked about dividing it. That was an ongoing conversation all the time, and we couldn't figure out how not to divide it rich and poor. So Jack came and helped us with this thing with Legos and everything. We built a model on a sheet, and we started these neighborhood communities. So the worship center or the community's gathering place could be separate from where you had administration and your big celebrations. Okay, so you could be small and big at the same time. So when I left Most Holy Trinity and took the sabbatical, I had been thinking about that a lot, and Pierre called and said, Matteo and Merv Sullivan are worried about you being there with nothing to do and in your sabbatical. And he says, I have a project for you. Would you come down and I'll give it to you? So I said, well, okay, I'll talk to you about it. And his thing was, where are the new parishes? Because we've got to expand because this place is growing and we've got to have a plan. So I said, good. Oh, I'd love to do that. So I went to every city's planning department. I went to all over. Any place I could get any information. School districts had unbelievable demographics and everything. And there was a guy at the Chancery office, Terry Icino, but the person that worked with him, in any case, he was great with computers. So I gave him all this information.
Jim somebody or other.
Yeah, I forgot who it was.
Remember.
But he put all this information together. And then I went around to the deaneries and talked about what was happening in their area, what the cities had planned for their area, and asked them, well, what are you going to do? Well, most of them were saying, well, you know, when they get here, we'll have to deal with it. Okay, so I mean, it was like you bring a problem to people and they didn't see it as a problem in any case. So I worked up a possibility for Pierre, which was, here are the parishes that you really got to divide now. Here are the parishes that were underperforming in the sense that they had a large population and they were not getting their share of that population, or that population was going to the other parishes. And we could equalize it if we were better assign people, okay? And then came up with a model for St. Francis, 3 parishes on the east side, Norwood, St. Francis, and where Christ the King is. And we looked for land, and Mitch divided the property at Fowler Road into 2 pieces and bought the land when Bob Moran was pastor at Most Holy Trinity, where St. Francis is. Mateo and I, we had looked at Christ the King. In the process of looking, Mateo and I took a trip to the Diocese of San Bernardino because they had given a workshop at the LACCD Congress about what they were doing. They were building 10 parishes a year. So we went and said, hey, you got experience. We don't have that experience. And they showed us what they did. They had a model, well, like the guys in 6061 had done. They took the plans from Morgan Hill School and they plopped them down all up the east side. I mean, if you look at Most Holy Trinity and St. Victor's and some of those, they're the same plans that were, okay, so and if you looked at the buildings of the early churches, which was Stewart was the architect, there were all that small box, which they called a mission style, but it wasn't. Mission style was box. Huh?
We used to call it shoebox.
Yeah, that's right, shoebox, okay. And so that's what they did. So that's what San Bernardino was virtually doing. They had a plan and they just, set them down. But they also had these 2 new parishes, and Nora McFarland, the bishop, said, you ought to go and not look here, because Nora had been my pastor at MH Mush and Dolores. So we went, and they had bought a shopping center because real estate was depressed. And so they bought a shopping center, and the store became the church. The smaller stores were the school buildings and the offices and that. And then they turned in what was to be a restaurant in the corner, like all these drive-ins are now, drive-ups are now. They had one of those started and everything. So the parish took it over, and they made a restaurant on the top floor, and they ran the restaurant, the fast food place on the bottom for jobs for their kids and everything.
All right.
The guy was really creative and used the whole shopping center. Got it cheap because it hadn't gotten yet fully finished. And I thought, wow. So we came back and we heard from Murphy Sabatino was his brother wanted to get out of, Mauricio wanted to get out of Pink Elephant, which was, that was a big chain for Spanish speaking. There was a big store in Edenvale. Tony Tederucci was former vice mayor in charge of public works, and he and I had scoured that area. We found the place where Valley Christian is now, and we were thinking about buying that, but it's on Trappistine, or what do you call that? In any case, it's a material that easily breaks up.
Oh.
And to build on it was going to take a lot of money. So we said, oh, we can't do that. And all of a sudden, Murphy said, well, my brother's going to sell this Pink Elephant. And so we talked to Murphy, and he said, Mateo is scheming at all times, and said, well, what about a joint remainder trust, and that we'll give him a life inheritance, and because that's what he wanted, huh? Mauricio and Murphy wanted to take care of his brother. So he said, sure. So we went and saw this monster building, and so they gave it to us as a joint remainder trust. And then we tried to buy the stores along there, but a Chinese person owned it, and he saw that we wanted it, and he just wasn't going to give it to us.
You.
But he leased us the drugstore next to Murphy's Mauricio store. Mauricio actually then retired 2 years later, and then or a year later, and in that year, St. Francis actually subsidized Christ the King. We put all the, they ran their budget and everything through our budget. And we said to the parish that we would build St. Francis, but we would also pay back the mother churches. So we sent $50,000 a year to Most Holy Trinity, and we sent 25 to Maria Goretti, and we picked up the tab for Christ the King. And we, with laborers, started the building. And then Dan, who was on sabbatical, came and finished that project. So they used the drugstore for a while.
I remember.
And then they moved to the big building. Finally, they divided it, and but for that, and then Mauricio died in 2 years.
Yeah.
So in fact, we didn't have to pay a lifetime of thing. I forgot what the end thing, but for about $4 million, we built a parish. While it'll take a new parish now, 22, 23, 25 million to build. So, I mean, it was an unbelievable saving.
And that parish is flourishing.
And the parish is flourishing, and it's a model that you could replicate. We decided that Maria Goretti needed a mission, and the deanery on the east side took over and helped the sisters with the beginning of the community at what was the name of the school? The little school first, and then I helped them find another place, and then we went
to the
to
Holy Name Sisters, I think.
Yeah, the Holy Name Sisters. There were two of them. They were great.
One of them was Kevin Joyce's aunt.
That's right, and
Sister
they
Catherine
worked
Irene.
out of an apartment there,
Yes,
and they started a library. I mean, it's the most creative group, Santee Mission.
Yep.
Okay, and so the 9 parishes on the east side gave I think it was $200 a month to subsidize that place, and we allowed that to. I mean, we helped. We just gave them the money. They did all the work. We didn't. And then some of our social justice people helped and that sort of thing. We moved them to another school that was a little bigger, and then finally Kennedy School. In the meantime, the 2 sisters and I looked at the actual place now that the Koreans have, and we went to visit the minister because we noticed on Sunday he didn't have a lot of people, and we knocked on the door and said, we'd like to talk to you about this facility. It had classrooms, a big worship space, and a nice rectory and everything. And he said yes. I mean, we had found out that he was moving to Gilroy, the congregation. So we said, we know it's open, and could we talk to you? And he slammed the door on us because I guess we were Catholics, and sister and father. And I had dressed up as a priest, so I could really, which probably was a mistake. But in any case, I've always kept my eye on that place as a place. We looked at a place on Lucretia, right next to Yerba Buena High School. But again, it was too expensive. And then Terry Sullivan and I looked at some places up McLaughlin. There was an Asian island church that owned a building, but he was a corrupt guy. That's all I got to say. So every time Terry made an offer for the place that was within reason, he would then escalate and change the thing. And so Terry just got discouraged, and that was the end of that one. So we then ended up with land for St. Francis. We have the land up on above Norwood, but it's impractical to build on because it's against the foothills, and the city of San Jose said you have to have a 4-lane road,
Oh.
and there's no road in,
Oh.
and there's no sewer line. So to open the property would be a lot of money. We still had half of the land up on Fowler, which we then sold to the school district for a school. The problem being that there had been a chicken ranch, and we had to. We weren't smart. We weren't really good at building. In 2 cases, that case where people said, a developer told me, he said, "Why didn't you go in with a tractor and spread?" Because it was just in an isolated spot what the DDT was, and that wasn't what we did. So we had a large expense, and we didn't make as much money as we thought we would. And then that was to build the place up in Norwood. And then we had Christ the King done. Maria Goretti with Santee Mission was on the plan that I had turned in. And then we talked about developing the mission in San Martin and buying land down in the Gilroy Morgan Hill area. And we identified some property there. And then we suggested that we not spend any more money enhancing parishes on the west side and move that capital somehow to the east side to serve people.
Because that's where the population is.
Yeah, that's where the population was shifting even then.
Sure.
We, the full plan was, I presented the full plan to Pierre, but when it came to the priest council, Al Larkin was the new vicar, and he, a parish, they separated my job. And they didn't present the plan, and people didn't understand the idea of separating the worship space from the... So what we even said about, what I said, and Mateo helped me when we wrote the plan, was that a worship space is different than where you're going to have administration and program, and that people would be willing to travel for social service or for education or that sort of thing. But the building of community need to be more localized and smaller. The Episcopalians Alban Institute did a study about the size of religious communities and the structure that you had to build for each size. So 164 families was all you could have with one pastor. But when you went to a pastor with an empowered staff, you could go up to 522. And then, so they had it all the way up
very specific.
to a corporate model. And we were even bigger than the corporate model. But we tried to say to them is that we could incorporate that with that research, look at worship community. And that, in fact, our parishes had been multiple communities as one. So there was the community, the school community, the bingo community, the senior community. I mean, those were all vying and power centers if you were a pastor. And you had to try to placate and move them together and have them coordinated. So in fact, we had those, but now we haven't replaced them. There was no CYO. Bingo was kind of out. Some of the power, the communities that built around St. Vincent de Paul or Knights of Columbus or
the catechetical crowd.
The catechetical crowd, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone was a community, and they tend to identify together at one worship community or another. And the worship communities, people went to 5 o'clock Mass over and over again. So why not organize around that? Which we then did at St. Francis. In the model of St. Francis, we took the Filipino thing of a pastor, so we called them ecclesial coordinators. We took liturgy, the worship person, she was a worship coordinator. And then there was a social action, hospitality, sick, all that sort of stuff, coordinator. And then there was the ecclesial coordinator was like the general overall overseer of the three, and they built networks of people, and they were to build the 10:30 community or the 10 o'clock community. That idea of building worship communities separate from the administration and the social programs and the pastoral programs, maybe. That part of the plan never got voiced and accepted. I mean, I tried to do it at St. Francis, but it wasn't a diocesan. But that was what, in that year before St. Francis, that's what happened.
Yeah.
And so when we started St. Francis, we started it with that different model of diversifying the leadership, of empowering people outside, of trying to build that sense of personal responsibility for the mission.
Yeah.
I don't know how well we did at it, but I mean, that was our goal. And
A worthy goal.
And you recruited, and you, in your imagination, people could hear that. So a different sort of person came forward. So a lot of the guys on the parish council or women or finance committee and everything were CFOs and CEOs and everything. I mean, there were a different crowd than when we used to work with the catechetical people and tried to bring them into liturgy and everything else. That was a person that was really into service, grassroots thing. But you had somebody who could think a bigger picture. So we were advantaged in that sense.
Yes.
There's a lot of youth in it. I mean, vitality of this isn't working, and boy, if this could work, you know, they saw the handwriting on the wall when their kids weren't going to college and they were spending all this money, or Catholic school and all this money, and then they ended up not wanting to go to church or anything, and so they were saying why.
Yeah.
We learned it at Most Holy Trinity with Anna Cruz and Will Sousay,
Yes.
those youth ministers, and then at St. Francis with Julius, where they built large youth ministry groups, not as one bigger group, but a lot of little group. I remember, and I'm going to see Jack Fagan, he did it at Most Holy Trinity, and it was amazing to me. So he had the group, you know, up to 500 kids, and then Anna Cruz took over, or Sister Guadalupe Gerardo, and then Anna Cruz. Will Sousay was at Most Holy Trinity.
Yes.
And they were able to build large groups. A lot of youth ministers get trapped into, you're hearing all my biases, but get into dealing with the individual problems of kids. That's not your job. You need to get somebody to do that for you.
Right. Yeah.
You need to build a network of support for those kids. But your job is to build the network, So my intervention all the time is about that. And that's the same with when we did what parishes needed to grow, how should the diocese grow. When we submitted that, I had gone to every deanery again and showed them the whole project and everything. But
just one interesting observation when you talk about going to all the deaneries. That was one of the great gifts of our diocese, one county.
Yeah.
That this was not a huge effort to go to all of the
That's
deaneries.
right.
It was wonderful.
One of the problems was, and we tried to address it in the 91 reorganization when Jack, lawyer, was here, and then we tried to do it once later, is that not always the offices in the diocese would conform to the deanery boundaries. And not alone when we reorganized the deaneries to be what pastors could work together and which ones had an idea that they wanted to work together, and then which we did in San Francisco because I was in the priest council at the time. We organized deaneries around clusters of people that work together. And then I was on the personnel committee of San Francisco and the chair. We tried to assign people that, and not move people very frequently. So it was more intentional. And I think we haven't been as intentional about where I think our strength was, which I agree. It was the deaneries.
Yeah.
Before you had a lot of uniformity, not uniformity, but ability to work together, a desire to work together. Now it's more scattered. People don't know each other. They didn't come from the same seminary. There's a lot of reasons that have divided us.
Yeah.
And so we can't build that same thing, and we keep moving people so much. I mean, on the east side, it just, who's on what
Who's
bench.
on first, right?
It kept changing, and I understand the personnel department the clergy personnel has a problem because of language and a whole number of things, huh? But that movement just kills that intentionality of trying to build a broader team, of really requiring them to work together, of empowering the deans to be more than just what are the guys thinking, or what are the people thinking, or would you get them together so we can talk to them from the diocese point of view? It should be an ongoing reflection and a energizing. I'd love to talk about how we started retirement, huh? I mean, that was another Pierre's project. I think that the other, and now I remember the two things were the lay ministry thing that he wanted to get done. The other one was personnel and retirement, and because we got the money from San Francisco, and Matt Sullivan says we've got to do something with it and not do what they're doing in San Francisco. I remembered that first deanery meeting I went to where that was a big discussion with McGuckin. And so we, with Matt's help and Mitch and myself, we took the money and we made an investment in Nick Nicolai, a consulting firm, to say, could you help us develop a retirement program? Mm-hmm. And we were really one of the first west of the Mississippi to do that. We were one of the first to have a personnel policy. Bob Johnson and I wrote that way back in the 70s. But again, we were first with retirement, huh? Still, San Francisco just is barely getting to it.
We were also one of the first for salary, the sisters bringing the religious up to lay standards.
And the same
salary.
With priests. We moved from a stipend orientated thing to, and people don't understand that, but we tried to deal with all the stipends, but the one that went for Mass went into the parish, and then the parish could afford to pay the priest a living wage, which we used the University of California's what does it take a single man to live in the valley, and then we eliminated the things that came with the rectory, and that was the salary. So
we've done a lot of firsts.
We were the first to have that. So those were the two things of retirement and moving from stipend to a more, and not salary. I mean, it's not a salary or a compensation like you would talk about in business, but it was much more than anybody else was. And it's still one of the largest salaries of any priest in the United States. Huh? I mean, people are amazed by it.
And also our benefits package.
Yeah.
As
it
a
really
layperson working, we are blessed in this.
Mitch, but that came out of John Dwyer was the big advocate. Remember way back, that was both in San Francisco and here was a big advocate.
Monsignor Mitchell was right there.
Yeah, with that, and the diocese made some. The euphoria when we had the ability to get the $70 million out of the St. Joseph's land would have been. It was such a blow to. Have the development not go through.
Oh, Monsignor Milani talked about that.
Yeah, they would know more than I.
Yeah.
I mean, I was only on the fringe of that, but I came just when they signed the deal with the banks in the East Coast, and so there was this sense of, wow, we're going to get $70 million, and that would help us build out where we needed to build out and everything, and to have that dashed and was really a monster problem. Yeah. I mean, it just became a problem. And then the financing of the cathedral, where it started to run away on us, and Terry finally just ended it. And those were the only years I always figure one of my great achievements was balancing the budget for 3 years or 2 years in a row when Terry was, there, and Jim Purcell and Pat Marie, myself. I forgot who the fifth one was. But in any case, we balanced the budget 2 or 3 years in a row.
Wasn't Gene Boyle?
I forgot who was on at the time, but in any case, that we balanced the budget. It was the only time we had balanced budgets, and I was like, darn it, we did it. Bob Summers was the CFO, but not always helpful. But I think that it took a lot. I remember Pierre went on sabbatical and he came home, and he said, "Well, how did you get this balanced budget?" Like he was really amazed it was balanced, and he always had a love to spend money. So we showed him the newsprint, which was a mistake, because we wanted to show him that we had really thought of everything, and on it was the selling of the bishop's house and the fixing of the 3rd floor at the cathedral. Well, that's all he could see. That we sold his house from under
him while he was away.
Yeah, while he was away. And we said, no, we rejected that. Right. See, there's a big check to it. But that's all he could talk about, that we were that thing. And in the end, I said, I don't know who said it, but in the end we said, but it's balanced. It's balanced. And you're not having to move.
You're not homeless, and it's balanced.
It was so funny. I thought, oh my God. But it was those kind of intense meetings that really now in retrospect are laughing. And I thought the other greatness of our diocese was Pierre having, in the second week we had with Jack Lawyer, the issue that people wanted to talk about in terms of conflict was the cathedral, and it's overrun and how it had taken and absorbed a lot of money, and that they saw mismanagement and everything else. Jack worked us through the steps that you deal with conflict and everything. And people got out what they wanted to say. First in small groups, and then they got up on paper around the damn wall and everything. And we came to the final day, and Jack, where you talk, he did that thing about, I don't know, you all had atom bombs and you were, groups would have to vie with one another to how you work out conflict in a simulation game. And we did that. And so now he then said, well, okay, now let's work out this issue of the cathedral. And, everybody had their say and everything. And we did work out, and people came to a reconciliation with Pierre. And Pierre said, I've heard all of what you had to say, and I've listened, but he said, I'd like to go on and have a day where we just spend on issues that you're really concerned about. And so we did. We took 2 weeks, a week later or 2 weeks later, we met at Lenzen, I think it was Lenzen, and he listened to everybody. And we had a facilitator there, and he helped us say what we wanted to say. But okay, so everybody said what they wanted to say. I think everybody had a chance. Now, if they didn't do it, that's their own problem. I remember Norm Segovia stood up and talked. He said, this is the first time I've been here, and he was the first Filipino or Ray Kenny, some of the people, Brad Leninger, everybody got a chance. So, and Pierre listened and heard us and had to say back what we said, but he couldn't add to it. At the end of the day, he said, I've listened to all of you, but you have never listened as much to me. And the facilitator pointed out, because a lot of which was, Pierre, you seem aloof from us and not hearing, you hear us intellectually, but not in terms of feeling. And he kept pointing out how Pierre heard feelings and how he expressed them, even as he made the response that he could make in this dialogue. And so Pierre says, I would like to have a day where you have to listen to me.
Good for him.
And then have that back and forth. And so we scheduled it a week later, I think it was, and Ed Lesby came back and facilitated that day too, at great cost to the diocese. I've said that to people, the bishops and other people, that, our bishop did that. He listened, and we were able to say anything.
Yeah.
And he was able to say everything to us.
Doesn't
and I
happen
thought a
too
very
often.
frank way. And I've always admired him for that ability. When I was vicar for clergy, I could walk in and say anything. I don't mean, off the wall.
No.
But I could...
but nothing was off limits.
Off limits. And he might be angry,
Mm-hmm.
and I could say, wait a minute. This is not about you, not about me. We got to deal with the facts of this thing. And he would come, and we get something heard and decided. I always found he and John Quinn the same way, because I was in personnel in San Francisco the same way. And they were difficult times, personnel, and you had to have that kind of honesty about it.
Sure.
And you had to share about, I see this differently than you. Mm-hmm. But I always found him, as well as John Quinn, very, very open to the conversation and willing to engage the conversation. So he as well as me. We both did things that were off the wall or something, and everything else, and you could think. But the integrity of both of those bishops was extremely important to our development as a diocese.
Amen. You have been such a gift to the Diocese of San Jose. You are a visionary.
I don't know.
We owe a lot to you, and thank you so much for being here with us. This was great.